everyone. Good morning or good afternoon or good evening, wherever you're connecting to globally. Thank you for joining our webinar today, and thank you for your patience as we're starting a few minutes late. My name is Kristen Mcconnell. I'm the Technical Lead for Early Childhood Care and Education here at the Global Partnership for Education, and I'm very excited about today's webinar, in which we're highlighting the work under the Better Early Learning and Development at Scale, or BELDS, initiative, and looking specifically at two country cases, Ghana and Sao Tome and Principe, and looking at how they strengthen early childhood education in their education sector analyses and plans through the BELDS work. A few housekeeping rules to get us started. Firstly, just to say that, thank you for your patience ahead of time. This is the very first time we are doing simultaneous interpretation in 3 languages. So we have interpreters here for English, French, and Portuguese, because the presentation from Sao Tome will be in Portuguese. So just wanted to tell the audience to bear with us a little bit as we maybe work through a few of those technical glitches, but hopefully it works out fine for us today, and we can have a wide audience from around the world joining us. This session will be recorded, so anyone who registered for the webinar will receive both the PowerPoints in all 3 languages, or access to the PowerPoints in all 3 languages, as well as a link to the recording in a few days from now. A few housekeeping rules to get us all started. I know we have many people joining from the YouTube channels, so if you're having any technical connection issues, please let us know via email. You can reach us at webinars@globalpartnership.org. That's webinars@globalpartnership.org. Following our presentation, we will have a question and answer session. So please send your comments and questions to us throughout the webinar on the YouTube channel live chat stream. So as you're hearing the presenters make their case and presenting really interesting information, if you have a question for that while it's on top of your head, feel free to put it in the live chat, and we can address it with the speakers when we turn it over to the Q&A session. But yes, and just a comment to our presenters, and I'm trying to do so myself when we do speak, because we have live interpretation in 3 languages, to make sure that we are speaking slowly. So without further ado, now that we have some of our housekeeping issues already underway, I'd like to kick us off with this exciting webinar. So from GPE's perspective, early childhood is a priority within our current education sector, in our current strategy, and GP is now, as many of you know, ongoing planning for a new strategy for the next 5 years, in which it's expected that prioritizing at least 1 year of quality pre-primary education it remains a priority for GP and GP countries. So it's very exciting. The Better Early Learning and Development at Scale initiative, or BELDS, was funded as catalytic funding to GP several years ago. This was in 2017 by 4 foundations, one of whom is joining us today as a discussant. So those 4 foundations were Open Society, Dubai Cares, Comic Relief, and the Hilton Foundation. Gave some targeted catalytic funding to GPE to really help bolster the quality of early childhood planning and programming at GPE. And there's been a number of activities that we've initiated over the course of the past few years, but this partnership with UNICEF for the BELDS work is certainly one of them, and we're excited to finally be at the stage where we can share some of the results of the interesting work that's happened. So today you're going to hear about some of the in-country capacity building work that took place in 2 out of the 4 BELDS countries. And we also have a global toolkit that is currently under development, and I assume we'll hear a little bit more about that towards the end. All right, next slide. Eleni, can you progress the slides? Thank you. So just to give you an overview of what we'll discuss today, I'll quickly do an overview of what BELDS is. We'll then jump into hearing from the Ghana office and hearing from them on how they established an early childhood education policy framework. We will then move to Sao Tome and Principe and hear about how they integrated early childhood education into their education policy chart and action plan through their BELDS work. We'll finally hear reflections from Open Society and UNICEF, and end with 20 or 30 minutes of moderated Q&A with the presenters. So again, please, it looks like we have many people online, which is very exciting in all three languages. So please keep your questions coming so that we can address them with the audience at the end. Next slide. So in our partnership, GPE and UNICEF together, under this work under BELDS, we noticed that there's this main core challenge that even though all countries have early childhood as a part of their education sector plans, we know that early childhood is still on the margins of these sector plans. We know at the education sector analysis stage that comprehensive analysis is missing, or it's not as strong as other parts of the education sector, and as a result we see that the early childhood subsector plans are weaker than the other subsectors overall. We also know that early childhood education cost and financing data is not easily available at the country level, and therefore it's harder for countries to advocate, or departments within early childhood departments within countries to advocate for more budget to the subsector. And we know that overall, these early childhood education or pre-primary directorates are often the smallest in ministries, and therefore the overall early childhood planning and implementation capacity can be weaker. Great, and I'll give a little bit of overview of what BELDS is overall. So you see the graphic here. On the outside, we have the traditional policy cycle for education sector planning, where a country will go from sector analyses to developing a sector plan, to having it appraised and endorsed, to implementing it, to monitoring and evaluating it, and back around again. And really the core of the BELDS work is to make sure that early childhood education is well integrated into all phases of that cycle. And so today we're really only talking about the first two phases, the education sector analysis and education sector planning, pieces of it from these country examples. But the overall goal is that we're really strengthening countries' capacity to really have stronger early childhood sections within all phases of the policy cycle. So the intended outcomes of the BELDS initiative overall, you can see on your screen, I'm not sure it's well translated in the other slides, but it's to raise the profile of early childhood education so that it is recognized as an essential, integral part of education sector plans and policies, and therefore we can have tangible improvements to meeting the challenge to provide the world's children with universal access to pre-primary education. And secondly, we really want to ensure that national education systems, including the Ministry of Education and any other relevant ministries, are equipped with the relevant capacities, resources, and knowledge to mainstream early childhood education into these plans and budgets and strategies. So as part of the BELDS programming, we had over the past year, we've had in-country capacity development implemented by UNICEF colleagues in 4 countries, and we're going to hear from 2 of them today. In Ghana, and each country, I can say, self-identified which part of support they would want and what part of the cycle they are in to strengthen as part of their education sector planning process. So in Ghana, they worked on having a kindergarten policy directive, having a kindergarten costed action plan, and working on their M&E framework, strengthening that for early childhood. In Sao Tome, they worked on having an early childhood strategy and action plan included in their overall policy chart, to have more early childhood finance advocacy, and to have capacity building on the key areas of the subsector. And later, in about a month or so from now, we're going to hear from the other two countries on their in-country capacity development priorities and work, and that was Kyrgyzstan and Lesotho. So in the Kyrgyz Republic, they've been working on an early childhood strategy and action plan development, and to mainstream that into the broader education sector plan. And they've also been doing capacity building at both the national and subnational levels. And lastly, in Lesotho, they've had a costed scale-up strategy for reception classes, or the year before primary school starts. So they did a 5-year costed plan and really worked on having their early childhood data and analysis well integrated into their sector analysis. So between the two webinars, one today on Ghana and Sao Tome, and one in April on Kyrgyzstan and Lesotho, we're going to hear from all 4 countries' experiences with the BELDS work. Great, so without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the Ghana office to share their story with all of us here on the webinar. Accra, can you hear us? And could you introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thank you. Greetings, my name is Bright Day, representing the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service. And I have with me...
My name is Agnes Arthur, Education Specialist from UNICEF. And I have my chief here. She's new.
My name is Tara O'Connell. I'm the Chief of Education at UNICEF.
And my name is Eric Ananga. I work as education consultant supporting the development of the policy.
Thank you. So I'll be leading on the sharing of Ghana's story, and we'll give you the context in which Ghana has been able to establish the early childhood education policy framework. I'll also share a bit on the processes that we have undergone to get a workable policy, and then how the policy was developed, the entire development, and then I'll share some few insights also about the lessons learned in the entire process. So can we go to the next slide, please? Great. So the government of Ghana, having identified the importance of early learning or early childhood education, mainstreamed the kindergarten education into the basic education system in 2008. Having done that, we still have not been able as a nation to overcome all the challenges of the early childhood education landscape. So in 2018, an education sector analysis was conducted, and the early childhood education issues were identified. For example, we identified a high pupil classroom ratio of 53:1. That's on the average. And we also noticed that teacher competency and qualification for the KG level of education was not satisfying enough, even though 65% of our teachers were trained, but quite a number of them were not qualified in the early childhood education, were not specialized in that area. We noticed also the issue of school readiness, and this we identified through the learning outcomes that our children attain when they move to the primary schools and even to the junior high schools. So we identified the issues of overage and underage enrollment, and we also noticed the net enrollment and poor learning outcomes were actually issues of concern. The issue of family and community engagement, especially in early childhood education, was also very important, but we noticed that it was weak. And then we also identified the issue of limited use of data on early childhood education. In fact, in the existing monitoring regime, there is a limited range of data, and even the usage wasn't actually the best. We also, as a matter of importance, notice that we are faced with these challenges because we do not have an existing policy to guide and direct how early childhood education should be carried out in our nation. For that matter, the government of Ghana took action to put together a team to present a policy that will direct and guide the implementation of early childhood in the country. Next slide. So early childhood education was recognized as a bedrock of the education sector plan. So the education sector analysis actually provided a basis for developing the education sector plan 2018 to 2030. In this education sector plan, we noticed that the bedrock for it was the early childhood education, and so we gave a number of, quite an appreciable importance and priority to early childhood education in our education sector plan. It became one of the key areas that was mainstreamed into the ESP 2018-2030. Following from a successful development of the ESP, a technical working group was strategically established. In fact, it was strategically established because the technical working group was formed from various interests and identifiable groups, such as educational planners, statisticians, we had technical experts, we had policy advisors, we had non-governmental organizations, we had private sector ECE providers, we had budget and planning people from the Ministry of Education and the Ghana Education Service, and were supported by core leaders like directors and of various agencies. For example, the Ministry of Gender. We had agencies also like the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, National Teaching Council, and then the National Inspectorate Board. All these people came together to form the technical working group, but also there was a 12-member core team from the broad technical working group who actually led on the development of the policy. The diagnostic analysis was carried out by this technical working group to validate the state of the ECE subsector in Ghana with support from the technical working group and stakeholders. In actual fact, I need to put on record that in Ghana's approach, there were a number of stakeholder consultations at almost every stage of the policy development process. And in doing that, we actually identified 5 action areas for which the policy should focus on. We had broader stakeholder engagement and workshops around the policy action areas. The action areas were planning and management, we had curriculum, we had teacher pre-service and in-service, we had community and engagement or the community action area and family, and then we also had the monitoring evaluation as the 5th action area. So we firmed up the action areas for the policy framework, and then we produced an initial draft of the policy for review of the broader group. So in order to ensure quality assurance of the draft policy, we actually had engagements from an external group, specifically from the UNICEF and the the Global Partnership for Education, who actually were with us throughout the process. Sometimes we had to work online, sometimes we met face to face, and it was an exciting journey to really get the support from this external group of people who really helped us in getting to where we have gotten to currently. There was a dedicated ECE stakeholder engagement at the National Education Week, what we used to call the National Education Sector Annual Review. In fact, this particular one, I would want to also place some level of importance on it because it was an innovation in the 2019 National Education Week. At this forum, ECE was given a dedicated attention or forum where stakeholders actually that were very much interested in the ECE subsector had time to discuss and then even review the draft policy that was presented, and they made a lot of inputs. Next slide, please. Now, how did we develop the policy framework and the implementation plan? So in order to ensure that we are working with a policy that everybody will appreciate and contribute to, we came up with the goals and objectives and strategies for the policy. Then we went ahead to prioritize the strategies, and that was done by the technical working group. For example, initial strategies that were developed from the stakeholder engagement could number up to about 12 or so for one action area. But then after the prioritization, we realized some of these strategies could be merged and some could be actually integrated into others to reflect in other action areas. And so that was the technical work done by the technical working group, and we were able to now get strategies that everybody will be comfortable with. We did not end there. We again checked how relevant our strategies were with the education sector plan and also the education sector medium-term plan. So we linked the strategies that we've developed with what was already designed in the ESP and the ESMTDP. Then, in fact, we do not want to just draft the policy and leave it there. We want to go ahead and propose an implementation plan. So we developed activities which we linked to the strategies. These activities are supposed to serve as a guide in implementing the policy so that the policy already can have a kind of an action-oriented approach in terms of implementation. So we later also developed indicators for each of the goals and the objectives and the strategies and linked the activities to the medium-term plan and the ESP. Costing of the policy is almost completed, and it has been one of the main things that the technical working group has been focused on for over the past few months, and we hope that that will be completed very soon. Next slide, please. Yes, so in Ghana's situation, the development of the policy framework was work being done and at the same time capacity being built. So as the technical working group members built their own capacity and the capacity of other stakeholders, there was the opportunity for the massive online open course on mainstreaming early childhood education into education sector plan. Members of the technical working group gladly participated in this MOOC, which was organized by UNESCO, the International Institute of Educational Planning, the Global Partnership for Education, and UNICEF. All the members of the technical working group took part in this MOOC, and we found it very useful for the work we were doing. We also noticed that not only the technical working group members participated in the MOOC, there were other Ghanaians who took part in the MOOC, and we leveraged on that opportunity to bring them on board to contribute their ideas to the policy that we are developing or have developed. Members of the technical working group and of course the other people who participated in the MOOC were able to deepen their understanding of the ECE issues and use what we have learned and have been practiced to improve the work that we're doing on the policy. For example, some members say they have learned they've learned about how to campaign for support for ECE, and currently we are using various means to campaign, including online platforms, to campaign for ECE awareness and then ECE issues in Ghana, and we think that it is really going very well. We have Twitter platforms and Facebook platforms and most of the online platforms that we are using, and even in the communities, we are having a lot of better engagement this time round. Next slide. Yes, so having come up with a final draft, we decided to do a nationwide validation exercise. So there was a national broader stakeholder validation of the draft policy, which was carried out in 3 zones. So the entire nation was zoned into 3: the northern zone, the middle zone or the mid belt, and then the southern zone. So we engaged stakeholders in each of the zones of the country, and we had stakeholders making inputs again into what was developed. This has enriched our strategies and activities and aimed at getting a robust ECE policy framework for Ghana. Participants on the not on the technical working group who completed the MOOC also had the experience or the opportunity to make inputs into the policy, especially considering the 5 action areas. I'll soon share with you some of the aspirations and expectations that were shared from the various stakeholders as we did the validation exercise across the country. In the next slide, please. Yes, so this is a typical example of a collection of expectations from the northern zone, and we saw stakeholders expressing what they want the policy to do. For example, they want it to address to have an African background. They want workable policy. They want issues of teachers to be addressed. They want us to promote educational outcome. They want us to focus also on learning processes. In the middle zone, please, the next slide, we'll see how some of these issues relate, even though we met these people at different places and at different times. For example, issue of right age enrollment was highlighted strongly in the middle zone. We had quite a number of the stakeholders calling for families to support ECE. We thought this has become a very strong message, because if the stakeholders themselves are saying this, then it means they will be able to help us do a better campaign at the community level. We had issues concerning people calling for culturally responsive children. So we want our policy to equip children to be culturally responsive. What it means is that this has some relation with the northern zone that talked about having an African background policy. Again, you see issues of pedagogy at the early childhood level came in strongly. People calling for play-based pedagogy and play-based teaching learning materials. And of course, issues of teachers cannot be forgotten. And so these were examples of messages or concerns that fed into the policy that we have developed. Next slide. We are very proud to share with you some of the lessons learned in the process of developing the ECE policy. We've learned that the process takes time, and it requires political commitment and buy-in from leadership. Let me say that the government of Ghana and the leadership of the ministry, the Honorable Minister for Education, the Director General of the Ghana Education Service, and all other people at various leadership positions have really supported the development of this policy. We can say for a fact that without this support, we wouldn't have made this progress. Again, the commitment of the technical working group, which was strategically formulated, has been very, very, very key to the progress that we have made so far. It was a bit challenging for all of us to work, considering time and other equally important assignments or responsibilities for the members, but we've been able to manage and get work done to this level. Leadership and coordination of the technical working group was also very critical, which ensured the sustenance of interest. For example, the coordination from our lead consultants, Dr. Eric Ananga, and also our partner institution, UNICEF, Agnes, has been very helpful in this situation. The Ghana Education Service, being the agency that will lead on the implementation of the policy, was not left out. They were really actually at the center of the entire process. And I think this is one of the key examples that we ourselves have learned from and will replicate in other policy development processes. The ECE technical working group was critical to promote ownership. And I think this we were able to do through the broad stakeholder engagement that we have been able to do. We were able to even get people to advocate and champion issues of ECE. Currently, we have an ongoing campaign for right age enrollment, and we think that this is good for us because we have people from all walks of life, from politicians to traditional leaders to teachers to educationists, even market women, advocating for right age enrollment in Ghana, which we think is a good step for us in implementing the early childhood education policy that we have developed. The uniqueness of the ECE subsector was evident and highlighted in the process. Truly, we never noticed how unique this age of children were when it comes to giving them the education they needed. But in this process, we were able to identify how unique they are and should be given the necessary attention. As I said from the beginning, we noticed that ECE needed to become the bedrock for every other educational move or action that we are making as a nation. And so this became very evident throughout the process that we used in developing the policy. Focus on the ECE subsector needs to be aligned with other subsectors, with broader education sector priorities. And so we think that this is a lesson learned, and we are already incorporating this into other policies that are being developed. For example, the teacher education policies and the teacher standards that are being developed. We notice the contribution of the BELDS approach from the process, the technical support, the advocacy, the participation in the MOOC, and the exchanges that we have had have been really helpful in achieving the development of the ECE policy framework. And we think that BELDS has given us a broad scope of understanding in terms of achieving the best for early childhood education in Ghana. And we believe that quality early childhood education can be achieved, and we are ready to achieve that together with all our partners. And we are very grateful for the opportunity to share our stories, and we are open for any other ideas that we can use to improve our work better. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Bright. That was a really dynamic and inspirational presentation. It was great to learn more about the Ghana experience, and we really, really appreciate you sharing your steps along the way and your lessons learned. It's exciting. We can already tell from the live stream that there are already a number of questions coming in about the Ghana experience, which I will save for now. And we'll answer. Well, I'll propose them to you after we hear from Sao Tome. But just to let you know that many across the world are really interested in learning more about the Ghanaian experience. So thank you so much for sharing. All right, thank you. So without further ado, I'm going to turn to our colleagues in Sao Tome, and we're all keeping our fingers crossed that technology is on our side. Can you hear us in Sao Tome and Principe? We'll turn it over to you. Can you hear me?
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm the director of the education planning of Guinea-Bissau. Unfortunately, the sound is virtually impossible to, there is a lot of echo. Without any further ado, Ms. Maria Victoria will be addressing the audience, and she's going to speak a little bit about the issue. Thank you. And thank you to the GPA. Oh, unfortunately, it's virtually impossible. The sound is not coming clear in a clear fashion. We apologize, but it's impossible. There is some serious technical issues here. Also, a coordinating agency role. And we've been monitoring the whole implementation process of the BELDS program. Unfortunately, we are having technical issues, and we are trying to do the very best we can under this very precarious relay. We apologize. We can't hear.
Hi, just a quick note. We can hear very well, so we don't really have any technical issues.
Sí, por favor.
We can hear very well. If they can proceed, I think we're all able to hear them very clearly.
Lamentavelmente.
Is there a way that they can speak directly into the mic and you can do simultaneous translation?
It's weird when we don't see what's going on.
Weird.
Let's try again. Yeah, we apologize for our technical issues. I was trying to give you an overview on the UNICEF's role, and here in Sao Tome and Principe, and that is actually a new opportunity for UNICEF to position the BELDS program and to have new partners in the pre-primary education. The director of the program not only as a UNICEF as provider of technical support, but also facilitator with the partners, and also an opportunity to contribute with the World Bank and to lead to the pre-primary development programs and to be able to harness all the opportunities to provide better financing. It's a very strategic work with the collaboration of Guinea-Bissau partners. And this work started in 2010. And maybe Dr. Ruth would be able to provide you with greater details. Thank you. Good afternoon. Yes, good afternoon. First and foremost, I'd like to actually reiterate that the development of the pre-primary program has been more and more paramount. And right now we understand that we are in a very propitious, perfect moment to address these issues. We have already approved a law pertaining to basic education. And that is now compulsory and free education that's guaranteed for children aged 4 to 5 years of age. And we also registered a significant increase of pre-primary rate enrollment from 2014, which used to be 66.1%, to 2017 and 2018 to 78.6%. There is no audio in the booth at this moment. It's actually very important to actually underscore that currently we now have a much broader and much more holistic vision for our sector. And this was the result of joint exercises with partners in the education sector. And the idea was to align our strategies with the ECE and UNICEF, specifically pertaining to the pre-primary education. And thanks to great consensus decision, we were able to aim 2 important decisions. We are going to be talking about how it's important to have this holistic and inclusive vision of all the actors or stakeholders. And the first objective by 2023 to scale up inclusive, equitable, and universal access by Sao Tomean children, 4 to 5 years old, to pre-primary education. It started with an analysis of the education sector. And now, thanks to this new inclusive policy, we are putting some pressure towards a deeper type of analysis of the entire education system, but with emphasis on the pre-primary. This analysis aims to actually provide greater coverage and better quality. And it just reiterates the importance of the pre-primary education within the education system. And it was necessary to capitalize on the positive results by adopting a holistic and coherent approach to pre-primary education in partnership with the Ministry of Finance, as well as other pertinent ministries with the Education Ministry. And so we can have more resources and different strategies emulating what's been done in Guinea-Bissau. And the idea is to cover the basic education and provide a holistic approach. And we are working with the local governments, with the NGOs, parents association, PTAs, etc., and representatives of different civil society organizations. And this work could never be possible without the support of UNICEF. And it's the result of very careful planning and with the support of UNICEF and all the pertinent stakeholders.
Pede a elas para falarem perto do microfone.
Obrigada. Thank you, Marcelo. Quatro, ou 10. Uma ajuda. Now, yes, we had, no, we actually were able to hear, not very well, but we were able to hear. About the challenges and the actions, and several actions involve the coordination with all the proper stakeholders, and we created a council, an education council, and there are some instruments that can help us to define the initiatives so that we can have better planning and effective use of resources. We need to determine the different functions and responsibilities and all the tasks that each agency will be in charge of providing within high-quality parameters so that each agency would be totally aware of what to do. We also involve the parents because it's important for the families to have an active part, since families are a fundamental aspect of the good pre-primary learning experience for the children. So the BELDS initiative comes at a strategic moment, enabling a total review to be carried out by the policy chart and action plan by using diagnostic tools that have allowed for the realignment of strategies and activities in 6 key areas. And what was the result of this whole process? We have now a very clear integration of the pre-primary education to the rest of the education system with all the coordinating mechanisms and follow-up mechanisms. In addition, we have these integrated actions. We have the strengthening of different education capacities to be able to manage and to expand the education programs, either through intersectorial actions or through the proper communication. Another perspective, which actually stems from this exercise, was the reorganization of the different education districts. As you all are aware, our country is very small, and the administrative policy actually it needs to reorganize its education districts so that proper responsibilities can be given in the implementation and in the follow-up process of the education programs. In addition, we are going to see the next slide, please. We have no audio in Washington. Now, another important aspect, and it was already mentioned by the director, was the organization to actually be able to engage parents and teachers. We identified this involvement, the engagement of parents, as something fundamental. And last but not least, one of the short-term actions that we decided to carry out to define this new pre-primary early education is the necessity to have adequate programs for the parents. And the planning director is going to provide you with more details. It's important to provide high-quality pre-primary education. It's important that the quality indicators contemplate the idea of working in a contextualized way, taking into account the pre-primary, the early education, with the proper curriculum development, with the participation of teachers, the proper children's environment in the classroom, and the physical facilities in addition to the curriculum. And in addition, we are expecting that by May or June, if I'm not mistaken, there will be a meeting where we're going to share the visions with all the stakeholders and to see if we are reaching our goals as established in our action plan. We are going to address our positions and how the BELDS program can improve the whole situation of education. We are now planning our strategy for 2019-2023. However, this work is the result of a profound reflection on the multi-sectorial collaboration and how the NGOs, as well as parents and teachers organization, and this whole holistic approach that allowed us to provide a contextualized program with the challenges and the strengths inherent to the education sector, which actually allowed us to go back to what was being done and to reconsider what was working and all the strategies and indicators that were properly identified. And so this is a sort of guarantee that we will be able to provide an early education program that will be worth of our childhood. And with partnership with UNICEF, we are getting much better results. And here we have changed what needed to be changed.
Então, in order to conclude now, it's necessary for us to do a follow-up of the whole process. So we want to integrate in the process of education the early childhood education, ECE. We have to build capacity within the ministry to manage the ECE sector. We have to reorganize the districts and to work with the communities for this ECE policy. We have to identify mechanisms to involve parents, the awareness, and locally. We have to define minimum quality standards with the appropriate indicators for follow-up of the process. In the short term, we are expecting to carry out a new review of the sector, which will allow us to see what the situation is at that particular point. So this is our contribution. Would like to say that this is what we had to say to contribute with this webinar. We thank you very, very much for this opportunity to share with you our experience. And we're ready to answer any questions you may ask. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you so much to the Sao Tome and Principe office. We really apologize that we had so many technical difficulties, but we appreciate your perseverance, and we were glad we were able to work it out in the end. So, thank you so much for your presentation, and thank you to everyone online who worked through these technical difficulties with us. I'd now like to, and we have a number of questions coming through, so please stand by. We're going to have some quick discussions. two discussants, and we will turn it back to both countries to answer some questions. So I'd like to turn it over to Katie Annis from Open Society to give some quick reflections from her perspective on the BELDS experience, and then we will move to a few colleagues at UNICEF headquarters. Katie, are you online?
Yes. You can hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Thank you so much to our Sao Tome and Principe colleagues and our Ghanaian colleagues who have taken such a meticulous time and effort to really share with us what we've been doing, what they have been doing. The BELDS initiative is really a key effort. From the perspective of a foundation, the group of foundations that came together to collaborate with a multilateral, part of our motivation in doing so is that we cannot all be effective unless civil society, private sector, philanthropy, and multilaterals join together to prioritize the most important issues. And the key nature of incorporating early childhood education into systems of education is transformational. If we don't change systems, then nothing else can flow from that. So it's important for us to work at the system and policy level as well as the grassroots. And then if we look at the rationale for really putting a focus on bringing ECE into our sector plans, we know that the brain is 80% developed by age 3, almost 90% by age 5, and even 98.7 by age 10. So really, if we want to make our entire education systems more effective, if we get kids able to learn at the beginning, then it improves the entire efficiency of the system. Sometimes I think of it like a coat rack, that the early years are like building the pole of a coat rack and the sticks that you would hang your coat on and the height of the coat rack. And once you get that built, then in middle childhood, we layer on the skills, knowledge, and attitudes that kids learn through the rest of the formal education system. So coming directly into what our colleagues have presented today, I think it's laudable to see the passion of our Ghanaian team, the commitment, the tenacity, and then the forward-looking vision of what this team has done, and being willing to look not only at the sort of incorporation of this into this policy and system, but also following it through so that these plans can become realities. With the Sao Tome team, it's excellent that they have really prioritized universal access. And dealing with the challenges of, lack of, technical equipment and lack of resources and, smaller scale funding and smaller size populations to generate tax revenues to support this work. It's laudable that in the face of all these challenges, they have really put together a broad, holistic vision and have really targeted and pinpointed the efforts that will make that successful. And there's really key value, I think, in linking our colleagues in Sao Tome with what's happening all over the Lusophone world, which is very diverse in Brazil and Mozambique and Angola, Guinea-Bissau, and other places like Macau and Timor-Leste in Asia. So there's really some fantastic work that has happened in both of these countries. And I think our hope is, as foundations, is that the incorporation into the system and the policy and the structures is step one. And the rest of the steps that follow are the actualization of these excellent plans and putting them into action and letting that trickle throughout, to the grassroots level of the nation. So I'll say I'm very proud of our colleagues and of the work that UNICEF has done in mobilizing this. And the desire is that this can be, taken to scale, that, across all education sector plans, there's a specific focus on integrating the early years as the foundation for successful later learning outcomes. So I will turn it back over to you, Kristen.
Great, Katie, thank you so much, especially for bringing us back to really the systems level thinking on this. That was really helpful insights. Hert and Sao Chen from UNICEF headquarters, do you want to say a few words from your experiences about the BELDS work overall?
Yes, hi everyone. My name is Sao Chen Lin. I'm an education officer at UNICEF headquarters, and I'm joined by Hert Meritz, who is currently leading on our UNICEF global ECE work. And we've had the privilege to work with GPE and the BELDS countries on this BELDS approach. And just from a global perspective, all the exciting and very dynamic work that has happened and that continues to happen in all the 4 BELDS countries have shown very promising results. And we see that leveraging the ESP processes to mainstream ECE really is a very strategic engagement that can help not only elevate the status of ECE subsectors, but also to promote ownership and accountability, as well as build capacity. And so this is an approach that we want to see happen in many more countries. And this type of exchange through webinars is a great avenue to share experiences and lessons learned.
Thank you, Sao Chen. And from my side, one of the key outputs that we're going to have from these 4 countries in terms of knowledge management is a globally relevant toolkit in terms of how countries can go about strengthening early childhood education in their education sector plans. So this takes the whole cycle of education sector planning into consideration and places it into context from the education sector analysis right through to the plan development and the monitoring and evaluation. We're very excited because from the 4 countries that have participated and from a review of other education sector analyses and education sector plans, we've seen that this is a need-driven product. Countries are asking for examples, for guidance, for tools that can help them to strengthen the education, the ECE subsector within these sector plans. So this toolkit will really go a long way in terms of helping countries to solidify early childhood education in their sector plans. What we like about how it's been developed is that it can be used at any phase, depending on the context of the country, where they are, whether it's the analysis part, whether it's the actual sector development part, or the monitoring and evaluation part. And we hope to have this toolkit ready for distribution to countries as early as July in terms of soft launching it, and then officially available by October this year. So we've seen some questions come up in the discussions around what are the tools available, and this is just one of them. That's a very good knowledge management product coming out of the BELDS initiative. So thank you from our side at UNICEF HQ.
Thank you so much. Yes, it's great to hear about this work that's upcoming. And from GP's perspective as well, we're extremely excited about this global toolkit that will be launched later this year. Now, we've had a great number of responses to our live stream online, a lot of questions, a lot of comments. Please keep them up. We're taking note of them so that we can ask our panelists. But I'd like to right now turn it back to the Ghana office, the Accra office, as we have a few questions specifically for you. The first one being, how long did the policy validation process take? And what was the role of the different stakeholders within that validation process? Secondly, another Ghana-specific question was, what is the level of training that kindergarten teachers have in Ghana? Is it recognized as professional training? So if you could kindly answer those 2 questions, I have some questions for Sao Tome and both of you together. All right, turning it over to Accra.
Okay, thank you very much. So the entire, so I'm taking the first question, how long did the process take? The entire process took us about 1.5 years. Well, we started in 2018 and have gone through the processes as you saw from our presentation, and we actually now have a policy developed and also an implementation plan developed. The role of the various stakeholders, as you may have seen from our presentation, the role was first of all to make sure that they make inputs through the representatives in the technical working groups, and that was why it was strategic to bring in people from the identifiable groups and agencies. So those people were actually already helping in the process, but anytime also that we want a broader engagement, we bring in all these other departments and agencies, and also the community people.
Yeah, and I want to add a little bit to that. And what we also get the stakeholders do is when we meet, for example, those from the critical agencies that are involved in the development of the process, they make direct input into the policy document, comparing it with what they have in their respective agencies. And when we meet the bigger stakeholder group, we share the draft documents with them, and then they make their input and give recommendation as to what they want to see in the policy, which actually became very evident in the presentation Bright was making. The slide that shows bits of write-ups from the stakeholders, for example, is something we do first before we start the engagement. We ask the stakeholder to tell us what they expect to see in the policy and what are some of the things they want changed or they want added. And it came out that most of the things that they've written are actually the same things that we have in the policy document. So we will say we have a very high level of engagement and the input from stakeholders in the policy development. If you ask me to score it, I would say it's about 80% coming from them, yes.
Just to add to my team members, I think it's also because the whole process has been aligned with the ESP, the Education Sector Plan. And so you realize that the ESP has all the priority areas. That is mandated, that's other different agencies have been mandated to do. And so once their representations or their representatives are part of the whole process, or they form part of the validation or the stakeholders engagement, it becomes like they own the thing. They own the whole ownership is really key. It's actually key, and they feel part of the process, and that became very obvious in the sense that they felt like, this thing can be sustained, and that the commitment and the excitement within which all the stakeholders were really engaged was really high, especially at the National Education Week, where we had, specific forum for early childhood education. We had over 250 participants, yes, attending the we call it new National Education Week, and with this specific forum that specifically organized for the ECE policy. Now the issue that came up was with the KG policy first. Yes. Everything we had the KG, yes, KG first policy, yes, yes. KG first policy. Yeah. So everybody was saying that after presenting the policy, all the action areas, they realized that there was the need to respond to the distinctiveness of early childhood education. And so everybody was saying that, yes, KG first policy. Now KG has become the whole, talk of town. Everybody is just talking about KG because of the role, the technical, working group, and then the leadership of the ministry and the Ghana Education Service has been very, very, very helpful. They have led the core team and they actually identified their technical working members to be part or to represent on the technical working team. And so it's been very, very strategic. When it came to the financing, sorry, I'm just digressing, but I need to. When it comes to the financing or the costing implementation plan, you realize that strategically, we also engage the Ministry of Finance, the budget officers from these areas. We also engage the financial controller who is leading on this. And so you realize that situation where the costing of the ECE, the policy will be different from the structure, the education structure, because it had to be uniform. And so the reason for bringing them was really strategic. And at a point, they were even guiding us as to what to do in terms of how to even, get what to do to mobilize more resources. So strategically, the members that were identified were really key. Yes.
And before I share something more on the level of teacher education, we found out also that the other stakeholders, particularly who are coming from the other subsectors of the education sector, like primary, secondary, tertiary, they have recognized that to address issues of net enrollment, low net enrollment at the JHS or SHS level, we have to start tackling it from the KG level. And that is why the stakeholders, knowing some of the gaps at the higher levels, point out to KG first as a way of helping address the other problems that emerge in the future. And then I move to talk about the level of training teachers have in Ghana.
Yeah, that's the second question.
Yeah, the second question. We have about 3 different levels, and some are fading off and others are coming in. First, we've had in the past certificate teachers who are trained and certified to teach. These people hold just a certificate in teaching. And then the next level is a team of people who hold diploma in education to teach at the KG level. And then the third level is a Bachelor of Education degree to teach at early childhood level. Now, in the past, the level of training teachers have had was more of a general nature. So our teachers were general teachers. But now we've had a massive teacher education reform, which is pointing to specialization. So currently, all our teacher training institutions are training teachers specifically for KG and specializing in early childhood education. And there is a drive in the ministry to organize in-service training for teachers who are already on the field to update them on ways of pedagogies or play-based pedagogy in teaching children. And this is also one area that has been highlighted in the policy. So we hope to see more of that during the implementation.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And there's a whole number of questions coming in from the live stream about both Ghana and Sao Tome. And in the interest of time, I have to really narrow it down to just a few. So this is going to be a question to both countries. And I'm going to, since we're online with Ghana at the moment, ask Ghana first and then move over to Sao Tome. We've talked a lot about these early planning processes, right, to the sector analysis and the sector plan. But, this listener wants to know, how is early childhood education mainstreamed in the annual sector reviews? Who takes part in those review processes? Any lessons learned you have to share with the greater community about that process?
Please, can you come with the question again, please?
Sure. How is early childhood, so moving away from kind of the sector analyses and sector plan to now look at kind of annual reviews of sector plans. And I know this particular policy and plan that you put together won't be reviewed for probably a year's time. But in the past, how is early childhood mainstreamed into the education sector reviews, the annual reviews? Who takes part in it? Any lessons learned you have to share from the Ghana experience about that?
Yeah, thank you very much. So in the past, early childhood education was always reviewed as part of the general basic education sector. And so when we meet at the National Forum, for example, we have the thematic area or a group, which is the basic education group. And at that smaller group level, we will have to discuss issues concerning early childhood. We have to discuss issues concerning primary education. We have to discuss issues concerning junior high school education. And so you realize that in the past, we did not have enough time and engagement in the area of early childhood education. But that changed last year at the 2019 Education Forum or National Education Week, where we had a dedicated forum. And those who participated in this forum are directors of education, teachers who teach at the early childhood level, those from the academia, researchers. We had private practitioners, private early childhood practitioners. We had NGOs, and then we have, of course, our partners. Partners such as UNICEF, we have IPA, we had USAID, and a host of all these people actually participated. And that is actually the difference between what we were doing in the past and what it has come to now.
But just to add to what my colleague said, depending on the area of expertise, they joined, the different thematic areas. So, for instance, if you're really interested or you have some expertise in early learning or early child, then you would want to go. There. But usually, we strategically the leadership, ministry, and Ghana Education Service also strategically identify people to be part of these thematic areas.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. So hoping our technology is working with us, can we move to the Sao Tome office? Can you hear us? Sao Tome, can you hear us? I would ask the same question to you about how early childhood is mainstreamed into your annual sector review process. And then I have a follow-up, I can see you. I have a follow-up question for you also that came in from the online. One of our listeners was curious about, in your country, what is the deadline to reach universal access?
I would like to start by saying that our strategic plan offers a very holistic vision of what we understand that should be given in a certain time frame. And this vision gives priority to the concerns vis-a-vis the sustainability and resources and solidification of resources towards the implementation of the program, follow-up mechanisms of all the actions to be carried out, as well as training of the proper human resources. Also, it's important to say that those actions have been carried out. They are all underway, and the early childhood education is part of this general vision, but with the proper sectorial specificities. Just to complement what my colleague just said, I'd like to add that the private sector has its role within the political chart, the policies chart that we have. When we mention the framework law that allows the mandatory universalization of the education programs in our country. So the indicators that we came up with the results of the last 3 years, with the proper UNICEF contribution, helped us so that the early childhood education would become the core of any government education intervention, so to speak. So when there is greater supply as stated by UNICEF, this went hand in hand with 2 shifts. That meant that in 2 years, children go to school. Only one group attends school in the morning and another group in the afternoon. This is a supply that the government is offering. So the full-time education to provide good, high-quality education. Another government intervention was the mandatory and free education for the age range of 4 years of age to 5 years. And many question, why not the 3-year-olds? But the education chart introduces the concept of early childhood education. But these are options if the country wants to reach universalization by the year 2023, needed to make these options and allowed for the parents to choose if they wanted the child to start the education process at 4 years old, but after 2 years, it is mandatory. And so those were the options that the country offered. And we believe that in 5 years, with the specific definition of this BELDS initiative, and with specific ideas to be able to guarantee the aim of universalization of education, then it's going to be possible to actually accomplish all the goals we set up to accomplish.
Great. Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure to hear more about the experience in Sao Tome. In the interest of time, it's unfortunate we do need to cut the webinar off here. Like I said before, we do a number of these webinars here at GP, and I have to say this is one of the most participatory ones we've had thus far. Despite our technical glitches in the 3 languages, we've had a very active audience listing a number of different questions and comments and reflections from their own country experiences to both countries. So, we will collate all those questions and comments, and we'll send them back out to both Ghana and Sao Tome for their opportunity to comment or just hear what others are saying. In the interest of time, I want to quickly wrap up and highlight a few things. You can see here on the slide we have our next BELDS webinar will take place towards the end of April, on April 23rd, and will feature the other 2 BELDS countries, the Kyrgyz Republic and Lesotho. So please mark your calendars. For those of you who registered for this one, we'll automatically send you an invitation for the next webinar, but just have it on your calendars as we can hear from the unique country experiences in those 2 countries. We have a link here to learn more about the BELDS initiative overall, and including 2 blogs on the BELDS initiative, 2 country blogs that are already up. Stay tuned because there will be one from Kyrgyzstan appearing in the next week or so. So please stay tuned. We'll have all this information for you. Lastly, I do want to say there were a number of questions about the MOOC, the Massive Open Online Course that the Ghanaian colleagues referred to. So people were asking questions about, will this MOOC be offered again? How do I access materials? And I say as part of the planning team for that MOOC, we are still exploring how we can offer this course again. It was a 5-week course that was offered in October and November. But I do want to highlight that the course readers, which are very detailed documents covering each of the 5 main topics of the course, are now published online in English. And I think we're putting out the link right now on the 3 YouTube channels so you can access those materials. The translation in French is ongoing at the moment, so stay tuned in the next month that should be made available. And we're still in discussions about how to make this rich material more available for all. So thank you again to our great panelists. It was great to hear the ministry's direct experience in Ghana and Sao Tome. Thank you to Katie from Open Society. Thank you to our UNICEF headquarters colleagues for providing their perspective. And thank you again for all of you for joining in today. We will have a recording of the webinars available in the next few days. So please stay tuned to your email and we'll be able to send that out to you. Thank you so much.